things start to become much more expensive, people can't pay their bills, and of course you eventually run into the point where it cannot be turned around, the point of no return. So this is something that we are seeing right now in Venezuela, but it's not the first and only case of this.
Currency itself become not functional. And what I mean by that is basically that you're gonna start see coffee like $100 for one coffee, or 200, who knows, you know what I mean, depending on what level. So you're gonna carry a lot of amount of bills, and it's very few things that you can afford with it, you know what I mean? At that point, physical currency becomes dysfunctional.
This week's specials with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. 1 ounce 2021 silver Britannias for only $3.75 over spot. 2021 silver Austrian Philharmonics for only $3.95 over spot. And 2021 silver Australian Kangaroos for only $3.95 over spot. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty in Finance. And with us today is our good friend David Quintieri from themoneygps.com, and also a good friend, a special guest with us, Alejandro, who has direct experience of the Venezuelan hyperinflation. David and Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, now I'd like to start with David. If we can get kind of a understanding, I guess fundamentally, because we really want to dive into hyperinflation and also media bias and media censorship that has been going on in Venezuela. And we want to understand this fundamentally. So David, can you explain for our viewers what is hyperinflation first and foremost, and why does it happen?
Absolutely. We have many different accounts of this throughout history, going back to the great inflation of Athens. And essentially what we have right now today is that you are seeing governments, they print money till like there's no tomorrow, and they hyperinflate their currency simply by devaluing it. Back in the day, we would have coin clipping. We would have a situation in which they are trying to pay off their debt. They're trying to pay for a war. They're trying to pay for something, and they have to use these devalued dollars in order to do it, and it gets out of control. Things start to become much more expensive. People can't pay their bills, and of course, you eventually run into the point where it cannot be turned around, the point of no return. So this is something that we are seeing right now in Venezuela, but it's not the first and only case of this.
Definitely. So why does inflation get so out of hand when it becomes hyperinflation? And what specifically, how high does inflation have to get for it to be hyperinflation?
Right. There's different measurements that people use. Is it 20%? Is it 50%? I just know that once it gets very bad, it never turns around. There just aren't examples of that, unfortunately. When governments decide to print to infinity, they've made that decision and they go in that direction because politically they don't want to be the one to say we're going to take away the punch bowl. They don't want to do that. So they say we're going to raise the minimum wage up to a certain level, and we're going to do capital controls, and we're going to prevent businesses from doing this and individuals from doing this. And as they start to create more control and have less liberty, that presents itself with a problem, usually down the road, but the worse off this gets, it becomes closer and closer and closer. And now Venezuela is just one example of that. But of course, we've seen this so many times before. The governments, they just take it too far. It just goes way too far. It's trying to resolve a crisis, but that crisis never ends and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Alejandro, could you explain for our viewers what kind of inflation Venezuela has been having and you've witnessed, and also why has there been hyperinflation in Venezuela?
I'd like to start by saying that hyperinflation is a process. A lot of people think that hyperinflation happens from one day and another, and it doesn't happen that way. It has different phases. The main goal is to control people's freedom and liberty. That's the aim of the game, of the hyperinflation game. People don't realize, but at the end, it's just basically they start offering programs, free college, free healthcare, whatever it takes, to get into the power. After they being in power, then they change the narrative of the media. The whole idea after they reach power is basically to split population. They don't want people to agree. They want to split everyone, So that's when you start see censorship around with the media. They also start imposing penalty to opposition channels because they don't want the news, to be all over around. They want to control. So that's one of the first steps that they do after they reach power. As far as how we get to the hyperinflation, is like he just said, printing money, just giving money to the people. They create programs like for pregnancy women, for each child that they have, they start giving you an amount of money. What about the child spread? Sound familiar to you? We have right now, that's basically how it started in Venezuela, creating those MNT, UBI programs, for everybody.
And how does it impact the average person? Like your experience specifically, how were you impacted by the hyperinflation?
Well, when you start talking about inflation, the first solution for the government is basically to increase salaries or minimum wage. That's the first thing that they see as a solution. They don't see the problem is printing money. They see that the problem is because the company are being greedy, the private enterprise want to help the poor people, and they start putting that narrative all over, So that's the first solution for the government. Then the second solution that they bring to the table is basically price controls. So where they start telling the private enterprise, you cannot sell that item for $10, that you have to sell it for $5. So they start controlling profits for the private enterprise. When they start doing that, food become a problem because a lot of enterprises decide to close their business, because they don't want to be in that control, The ones that survive, then they have to comply with the government. And then you're going to see food shortage at that point, when that thing happens. But a lot of people, people right now just see the price increase on prices, food, gas, things like that. But right now, people haven't wake up. Money velocity is still down. We haven't started playing the game of the hot potato, because when the money velocity start increasing, that's when people start realizing, listen, we have a problem, we need to spend all this money. That's when people actually enter into hyperinflation move, But for that to start happening, your life has to be decreasing slowly. And how that happens, basically, you start seeing things that you cannot afford, like meat, like chicken, all different products like your monthly bills. You can barely afford them. And then you start reducing your meals or reducing the amount of things that you buy on a monthly basis. And then when you start realizing that you cannot really afford your living standards, then you see what is the problem, So then is when people start waking up, and then people want to pull money out of their bank institutions. That's when the government right there came out with the limits on the amount of money that you can pull out of your bank accounts. In Venezuela, they start with the amount of money that you can pull out of the bank accounts and also ATMs. So that's the solution for the government to a slow money velocity. And I like to highlight this at this point is we have digital currency coming up. That's why it's in the air. Everybody knows about it. What I think they're going to be doing that is just basically to control money velocity. Because if they have digital, they can control the speed, how the money flows into different categories. That's what they can do. So that's my guess that they're trying to do with this digital currency that the Federal Reserve is proposing right now, or they're working on it as we speak.
Yeah, if we could turn to David, kind of, if you have any comments on that, and then also your perspective on like what kind of reflection do you see in the U.S. of what happened in Venezuela?
It's funny as I'm listening to him, I'm thinking, is he talking about Venezuela or is he talking about the U.S.? Because there's so many parallels, and we see that happening, and like he's saying, it doesn't happen overnight. People are waiting for this major event to occur, a news flash, a bulletin to be put out there for everybody. Oh, now we're in hyperinflation today. Oh, there's going to be a bank holiday tomorrow. You're not going to be aware of it. It's going to happen silently, and they're going to keep all hush-hush about it, and things are going to happen because you're trying to do your work, you're trying to make, your business happen, you're trying to take care of your family, and next thing you know, you can't really afford that product anymore. You can't really do that service anymore because it's just not affordable. Why? Because the devaluation of the currency. Now, people are only going to see this as being, things are costing more. It's greedy companies. That store down the street is a greedy store, but they don't realize that the raw materials that go into that product have become more expensive. Why? Well, there could be shortages. There could be problems along the line, like we're seeing today with the supply chains. Yes. But nobody wants to address the obvious problem, as far as I'm concerned, and that is the fact that they are printing so much money. They're doing it in Venezuela. They're doing it in Europe. They're doing it in Canada. They're doing it everywhere. Everywhere they're printing an excessive amount of money. This devalues the currency. There are no examples historically that have ever gotten away with this. So I think that people should be aware of, the parallels we're seeing here. Will the U.S. become like Venezuela? I mean, that's too difficult to tell. Certainly, it's a different world. But as I'm sure Alejandro can talk about, you see a country that was, if I'm not mistaken, on par. The currency was once on par. It was a very strong currency at one point. And then what happens? Things happen over time, right? It just devalues and devalues. And as an individual, you're trying to take care of your family, things get out of control very fast.
To highlight there, they don't put just so you know, bank holidays. They don't do that anymore. What they do basically, they come out, we start having problems on the communications, internet. So that's the reason you can pull money out of the bank accounts, because they don't want to bring a scarcity to the people. You know what I mean? They want things to be normal. You know what I mean? And they don't want people to wake up. But of course, after things start unfolding, government become more radical on all the measurements. They start imposing penalties to private institutions for don't sell the prices. Like I say, they start taking control of independent institutions like the Supreme Court, like the police, because the whole idea basically is just to take control absolutely. You know what I mean? So they do that slowly. But the whole point of hyperinflation is just to take control of the people, freedom, and liberty. And people don't realize that. That's the aim or the main goal of the whole cycle. You know what I mean? So they know what they're doing, because this has been done all over in all different places. Argentina went through the same thing. Zimbabwe went through the same thing. You know what I mean? It's not just Venezuela. But it's happening right now, like he's saying, all different countries right now.
And I think the interesting thing is Venezuela used to be very prosperous. And then, because of government change and because of this hyperinflation, it is it's suffering a lot right now. Alejandro, your perspective on some of the parallels again between what we saw happen and see happening in Venezuela and then what you're experiencing here in the U.S. with respect to the monetary policy and government policy.
Like I said, first, your standard of living being reduced, you know what I mean, by the amount of things that you can afford on a monthly basis. The one thing also, the currency itself become not functional. And what I mean by that is basically that you're going to start see coffee like $100 for one coffee or $200, who knows, you know what I mean, depending on what level. So you're going to carry a lot of amount of bills, and it's very few things that you can afford with it, you know what I mean? At that point, physical currency becomes dysfunctional. Nobody will have savings at that point, because everybody's already up about what happened with the inflation and the price increase, you know what I mean, that happen on a daily basis. Lenders will not provide loans. You know what I mean? There is no credit in Venezuela. If you want to purchase a vehicle, or if you guys want to purchase a home, you have to be done cash. They don't do credit. Or people can afford not even to fix their vehicles. That's another thing, you know what I mean? Back in the days in Venezuela, they had a high traffic, you know what I mean? With the hyperinflation, a lot of people start getting out of the country, immigrate to different places. And also the people that is living in the country that they've been having issues with their vehicles, they can afford to fix them. They can afford to purchase a part, and you start seeing the roads more empty, which is a phenomenon. You see it right now in Caracas. That used to be the main city, you know what I mean? Heavy traffic all the time. That doesn't happen anymore. Another thing that we can highlight, during hyperinflation, people experience a lot of levels of depression. because that's exactly what it is. It's economic depression at that point, you know what I mean? Also, health insurance disappear. You're going to see the private health insurance, they will no longer offer their services because price increase is so high, you know what I mean? There is no profitable business anymore. So that's out. Also, teachers, you're going to start to see deficit on teachers because their salary is so worthless, you know what I mean, that they don't want to work for that anymore because they can make a living doing it. So you're going to start experience shortage on teachers in the schools. Of course, immigration, you know what I mean, at that point, the people that have the resources start getting out of the country. You know what I mean? That's why you see a lot of immigration from Venezuela in all over the place, you know what I mean? It's because of the hyperinflation.
I guess what I was also interested in learning about is the kind of the media censorship we see in Venezuela, because I'm thinking about how in the US, I mean, something that is kind of subtle, but it has somewhat of the same effect, is that we just see the stock market continue to rise, even though people's standards of living might not be rising. So it kind of gives this artificial view of the U.S. economy, how good things are when things might not be actually that good. So I know in Venezuela, the media tries to make the view of how people's lives are a lot better, you know, than they actually are. So your perspective on kind of what you witnessed in Venezuela with respect to media censorship.
Well, when the government become radical, they start creating new law for the private media. You know what I mean? Try to control the narrative. You know what I mean? So as the new media start coming up, you start seeing that it's being controlled by the government, and they very much don't have the freedom to say anything. You know what I mean? In Venezuela, the experience actually that one of the most popular channels that have long trajectory for a long time, they actually closed it down. They didn't renovate their permits to keep continuing their business because they actually were things looking around the ways, you know what I mean, how they can inform population of exactly what was happening at that time. So the government decided, you know what, we're not going to renew your permit, so they just decide to close the channel, you know what I mean? That also happened with radio stations, you know, so that's when you start to see people, they don't really get communicated. Right now, the only way that get real communication in Venezuela is through the social media. And it's actually the people, the citizens, that become more like reporters. People, when they start seeing things, they start taking videos and they post it all over, and that's how people get informed. But if you look at Cuba right now, they're also controlling the internet right now when things start getting, you know what I mean, out of control. So that's one of the first measurements that the government do, you know what I mean? So if they can control it, they will stop the internet service so the information doesn't go around people. A lot of people, you know, Venezuela had a lot of protests, a lot of people got killed during those protests, you know what I mean, trying to do the right thing, you know what I mean, fight for your rights and your freedom. But when you get to that point, it's too late. It's too late to do something about it, in my opinion. You know, all the institutions that actually support democracy are being invaded by a political regime, and it's just basically a dictatorship at that point. That's how it happened.
And if we could turn to David now, kind of sharing your thoughts on kind of the media censorship we are seeing right now in the U.S.
Basically, if you go against the mainstream narrative in any way, they will shun you, they will ban you, they will shut you down, they will do anything that they can to basically make it look like, you know, to tarnish your reputation, whatever it takes. So they're doing this today through all the social media channels. We know that there's been multiple purges of people just sharing what they believe is true and accurate. They're disappearing. They're trying to just basically memory hole them. So you can kind of see the parallels to 1984, where if you just remove things, people forget how to, you know, deal with it or whatever. But I just think it's crazy to see how they can talk about freedom, they could talk about, you know, liberty, and they're trying to help everybody. And meanwhile, it's the exact opposite. And we see this going on, like, obviously with the media, it's very clear, it's very obvious. But individual freedoms are being taken on every level. You know, it's funny the way that, for example, with the gold and silver, you know, it's supposed to be used as money. And today it's absolutely not the case. And even the suggestion that you would want to use gold and silver as money is ridiculous You look at a dollar bill, your U.S. currency, and it says Federal Reserve note at the top. It's not even real money anymore. It's just this private institution which is controlling anything and everything, and they have to have their independence. You're not allowed to know what goes on behind closed doors at the Federal Reserve. You're not allowed to talk bad about the Federal Reserve. That's crazy. And they only allow the reporters which will give those softball questions. Jerome Powell, what do you think is going to happen with interest rates? And okay, blah, blah, blah. And then they just go on. I mean, it's nonsense. Nobody's asking real questions, because if they would, I mean, people would be wondering, hey, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe the printing of the money and setting up special purpose vehicles without the people's permission, maybe that's not a good idea. But no, you control the narrative through the media, whether that's on social media or whether that's coming through the mainstream, and you will control the people. That's how it's done.
Even when President Trump was in office, look what happened to him on Twitter, that he got blocked out, you know what I mean? He was not able to be on the account. The President of the United States was blocked by Twitter. When I saw that, I said, this is over. I was not, they don't have respect for the office. They don't have respect for the title of the President of the United States. And they don't have fear for doing it. You know what I mean?
I think that's such a good point, Alejandro. And what I would like to pose a question to you first is, how do people protect themselves? This whole channel is about liberty and finance. So we've been talking about how, hyperinflation poses a threat to our financial lives, and also media censorship and communication censorship poses a threat to our liberty. So how do people protect themselves against these things if they are seeing them in the U.S.?
Before I get into it, I would like to tell you something, because when things start unfolding, the normal thing is that people will want to pull money out of their bank accounts. So when the government starts taking control over that, the next thing will happen is, if someone wants to travel out of the country and try to exchange U.S. currency for another one, that's another control that the government will put in place. So back in the days in Venezuela, if you want to travel out of the country, you have to go over to the bank, you have to put a request, you have to provide your airfare, you have to let them know how long you were going to be there. And based on their criteria, they will approve the amount of money that you can exchange to travel out of the country. So that's another things, that happen. And that's when you start feeling, the control, which is more heavy on people, But when they do the bank holidays, it's not really a bank holiday. What they do basically is they reset the currency. And what I mean by that, I think I showed you the other day, Venezuela have gone through two different resets, one during 2008 with Hugo Chavez when he was president. Right now, Maduro have done one, and he's working on the third one, which is going to be a digital bolivar. Digital, trying to control a slow money velocity. That's the whole idea of digital, in my opinion. But this, for example, this is a $50 bill. I don't know if you guys can see it. And the bill before this one used to be 50,000 bolivars. So when the currency has so many zeros, that's when they start. It's confusing for people. Let's just go ahead and do the reset. So this out of 50,000 become 50. This one used to be 20,000 and become 20 in one day. So, but when they do those things, let's say, for example, if you have your savings in your bank account, they usually do those things or those announcements on Sundays or Saturday, where they know that people can pull money out of the bank, So then that's when the research start happening. And that's when they start creating poverty, because people start losing their savings, So the proportion usually is like 1 to 5. It's depending how bad is the inflation, When the system become dysfunctional, people start adopting different programs or ways to trade. They start seeing people trading diapers for milk, or you start trading people food for service. That kind of start happening. But right now, Venezuela adopting the dollars, the U.S. dollar, as a media of exchange right now. So basically, if you go over there, things have two prices, one in bolivars and the other one in U.S. dollars. But everybody's doing trades in the U.S. dollars right now, as we speak. So that's another reason when we go into the reset, that I think it will happen. It's good to have your wealth into the precious metals, in my opinion, because I think that will be the way of the mechanism for people can do buy things, and trade without taking the effect of the inflation or hyperinflation.
In your perspective, David, the best way is to protect oneself against a collapse of their finances, right, with respect to hyperinflation, and also media censorship, kind of controlling what people say. For sure.
So definitely you want to hold real assets. Historically, we've seen that precious metals have been the optimal one that would do well during this period of hyperinflation. But when it gets to a certain point, anything that you can hold has more value than your currency. Like if you look at Iran right now, cars, you're seeing in the US that used cars have gone up, but in Iran, they have gone up 4 times, 5 times, 6 times of what they were before. And it has nothing to do with the value of that car. It's not worth anymore. But of course, the dollars have been devalued. So it depends at what level we're talking. But certainly right now, you look at the prices of gold and silver, they haven't corresponded to the amount of money that's been printed, whether that's coming from the quantitative easing or whether that's coming from the stimulus. But still, you would be holding them to preserve wealth over a long period. The same thing could be said for real estate. The same thing could be said for collectible items and so on. These generally maintain value over long stretches of time. There's always going to be fluctuations, but for sure, for certain, that the currency is going to go down the toilet. So that's what I would say, real assets in general, and then there's sort of fluctuations along the way. In terms of the media, it is extremely difficult to get around what they're doing. There's no doubt about it. I can definitely speak for that. You have to tiptoe around what you're allowed to say. They don't want certain things. There are alternative platforms out there, but unfortunately, they just don't have the audience, and that's part of the problem. Everybody's on the mainstream platforms, and that allows them to control what happens. And that's just the way it is. But I would say get on all of the different platforms all at once. And that way you have a little bit of diversification. That's what I've done and many others have done. Just simply go on the alternatives, go on the mainstream and get the word out. Whatever it is that you have to share, citizen journalism is the way to go because we know that they're not going to ask the right questions.
I like to mention that you bring real estate in your exposition. Real estate, and people that when you start talking about price control, a lot of people say, oh, that won't happen here in the United States. Look what's going on right now with the rent moratoriums, where landlords can pull out their tenants for not paying the rent. So in Venezuela, actually, when these start getting out of control, they actually put a law in place that you can actually pull anybody out of their houses, especially if they have children, So they control the price of the rent. And besides that, they also control that you cannot put people out in the street for not paying the rent. That happened also. And you mentioned real assets. I like to point out also in real estate, because it happened in Venezuela. During the inflation period, real estate prices go up. But during hyperinflation, real estate prices go down. And the reason why is because you're going to see people that want to get out of the country. So what they do is basically they want to sell their house. So at the point of hyperinflation, it's an affordability crisis. You cannot really afford things, So when the affordability crisis start coming up, then you're going to see people getting desperate to sell their homes or their assets, so they can leave the country. So at that point, you start seeing ownership willing to sell their homes for lower prices. That's what happened right now with the real estate market in Venezuela. So I like to point out, because a lot of people see real estate as a good medium, to protect against hyperinflation or inflation. At the beginning, it will, but eventually it will not when we have affordability crisis.
All right. Well, Alejandro and David, thank you so much for your time today. I guess starting with David, if you'd like to share with our viewers where they can find you and any last thoughts you'd like to add before we let you guys go.
So you could find me at The Money GPS. Search me on any platform. I am there on The Money GPS. In terms of last thoughts, I think people should take this information in, and for myself, I'm learning everything too. This is always so important to have a different perspective from people all over the world to learn what has happened there. I think this is really, really important.
Alejandro, any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers, and any maybe resources you think they might be able to check out?
Well, my message will be, don't wait for things get more bad than what it is right now. Get prepared. Do studies, research, you know what I mean? Because education is the key, you know what I mean, to understand what's going on right now, you know what I mean? They want to take control of our democracy, our liberty. People don't understand, you know what I mean? The money or the way they're doing it is by the economy, you know what I mean? By making everyone poor. 99% of the people in Venezuela are poor. You have 1% that always, you know what I mean? You're going to have in any country that is still well. But in my opinion, right now, 99% of the population in Venezuela is under poverty at the moment.
I think that's so key to really understand what's going on in other countries and in Venezuela, understand the causes of it, and see how there are parallels in the U.S. We don't know if we're going to see hyperinflation. We can't kind of predict that. We can't, give financial advice of what to do. But I think it's so important to know what's going on and also protect yourself. So Alejandro and David, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights today.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
This week's specials with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. 1 ounce 2021 silver Britannias for only $3.75 over spot. 2021 silver Austrian Philharmonics for only $3.95 over spot. And 2021 silver Australian Kangaroos for only $3.95 over spot. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.